The purpose of this webinar is to give the audience, including Swedish members of parliament and other decision makers, an improved understanding of the current worrisome situation in Myanmar, and to provide recommendations and suggestions on how they can act, or we can act, to support the democratic movement in Myanmar and increase pressure on the junta. Now I'll hand over to Brittis Edman from Swedish part of Amnesty International, who will give an outline to the seminar and introduce our esteemed panelists, who I also would like to welcome. So please go ahead, Brittis.
Thank you, Olle. Yes, I'll be today's moderator. And this next hour, we will hear about developments in Myanmar. We will hear about the continued deadly violence, about the fear and the growing human rights crisis. But we will also hear about courage and resilience and what we can do. Members of parliament, civil society organization, opinion makers, and members of the public. The seminar will be is live streamed and will be recorded, just so that everyone knows that. I'm very happy to see that so many people are joining us today to listen to our eminent speakers. And I am particularly happy to have you two both join us and help us navigate this complex and distressing development. So I'd like to welcome Dakim Ohmar, experienced human rights and pro-democracy advocate from Myanmar. She's the founder of Progressive Voice and chair of the advisory board of that organization. And she has been fighting for political reform, peace, and women's rights in Myanmar and more since the 1980s. Anything I'm missing there, Ohmar? Would you like to add something?
Thank you. Thank you, Brittis. No, I wouldn't add anything. Thank you for your kind introduction. Good afternoon to everyone in Sweden. But would you like me to start now, or do you want to?
I'll do the second introduction.
We'll do the second introduction.
Yeah,
right, of course.
Thank you. With us, we also have Professor Yanghee, a Korean human rights expert with particular expertise on children's rights, who until last year served as the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar, and since then continues to be a powerful and authoritative voice on Myanmar. And she is a professor at Sung Kyang Wan University in Seoul. Warmly welcome. And both speakers will make opening remarks. And after that, we will together give particular focus on some of the issues at stake. We will take questions from the audience at the end, and we will do so via the chat function. So I encourage you all to write your questions in the chat. And we have already received questions, actually. So we will keep some time for questions from all of you at the end. And with that, I give the floor or the screen to Khin Ohmar.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon again for everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for also having me. It is also my great honor to join Professor Yanghee on this panel. I'd like to share with you about the civil disobedience movement, or we call it as CDM, which is the center pillar of the current people's movement in Myanmar. I also want to give the overview of the ground realities that I see really needs for an urgent, coordinated, and unified international effort. So I will share with you on the two points. I mean, the two sectors. One is on the strength of the civil disobedience movement. Since the unlawful coup attempt by the military on February 1st, millions of peaceful protesters have taken to the streets to protest against this military junta. And people from all walks of life across nearly all geographical areas of Burma, 95% in fact, have come together to reject and dismantle this attempted coup by the junta. This CDM movement started immediately after the coup by the doctors and factory workers, quickly expanded to civil servants and public and private sector workers, including members of the police force, as well as some soldiers. And until now, some are still joining. And this movement has effectively prevented the military from controlling the administration, banks, hospitals, and other sectors of the country. To this point, this attempted coup is actually failing. It is failing. And this is very important point for that I would like for you to take a note also, how the people's resistance and defiance is so strong. Protests have been organized daily by the new generation of youth who are much more connected to the rest of the world, particularly through the social media. And they have been more creative and imaginative and more perseverant and defiant. And, you know, like also there are professional journalists and citizen journalists alike. They played a major role in documenting the evidence of the military brutalities and also letting the whole world know, letting you all know that what is happening to them. So Myanmar's diverse population strengthening the country's social fabric by sharing and caring for one another is also happening. Because, you know, like the military has been using so much violence. So now people really are now giving helping hand to each other. I just want to say that this movement is joined by different generations who lived under the previous military regime, also joining the young generation. So it's very vibrant, I would say, and very strong. And but you know, like this last 10 years, it was actually the civic space that the people enjoy was pretty much under the control of the military anyway. But in spite of that, they've tasted some limitation of the freedom already. And, you know, this resilient and the brave protesters, you know, like they are not about to let go of what they have already got in the last 10 years. They're not going to let go of that easily. So that's very important for us to also understand how Myanmar people will carry on with their fight against this junta. But of course, there are challenges. There's an extreme force of violence, you know, like the junta launched a nationwide campaign of brutality. And they've been committing the crimes against humanity, like, you know, the systemic murdering, forcibly disappearing, torturing, and all of these, like, you know, imprisoning throughout the country. So that is that the violence has been indiscriminate, and it's an absolute all-out war. That's what the Myanmar people are facing. And also the junta is using these war zone weapons, including like snipers and grenades and semi-automatic machine guns. You know, can you imagine, like, you know, these peaceful protesters on the street facing all these kind of war weapons, you know, like that being used against them, who are, you know, like unarmed. So it's really challenging for the people. Of course, the killing style the military has been using is executional style killing, aim at the head. And in fact, they even made the public announcement about it. That's how extreme the force, extreme violence that they are using. So one thing that also that I want to share with you is that they are really are trying to destroy all the evidences of their brutalities. You know, like also like you know, including like, you know, like carrying both the dead and also the injured away, and then the next morning they return the dead bodies. And, you know, like and the dead bodies are actually like cut and repatched, basically, you know, like that we think that they want to extract the bullets, you know, like to actually destroy the evidence. But also there are many cases that they actually demanded the families to give the money in order to for the families to get the dead bodies of their loved ones. So this is really like egregious crimes are happening. And also, like, you know, another thing that I want to share with you is that they are not only just like destroying the evidences, but they are also like shooting indiscriminately into the houses, but they are also like looting from the people. I mean, here we're talking about a military of a country, looting from the people, cell phones, computers, motorcycles, destroying houses, private property, even the food stores at random. I mean, you can imagine how it is for the daily life of the people day and night under this terror campaign. So far, 756 people have been killed, with 4,500 arbitrarily arrested, 3,441 remain in arbitrary detention. So The detention, I want to just raise one point on detention. The situation in the detention are really grim. And especially, you know, like I'm very worried for these young women, because there are credible reports coming out about the rape and sexual violence and sexual assault. It's all happening in the detention, even in the police station immediate after, you know, they were detained. So this is really worrying for us, that now we know that there are many young women are actually sort of disappeared. Family members don't have no idea where they are, more than like 100 at least. That's what's been reported. So like my last point on the challenge is the civic space, because Sweden is one of the countries at the forefront who supported the Myanmar civil society in the last 10 years to become vibrant and resilient and strong. And now we are losing all of the things that we have built for the last 10 years under this military. We have lost all of these. And the freedom of information expression is, of course, extremely severely cut by the nationwide internet cut, as you've heard from the media already, I want to say. But I just want to say the last, like in the closing, these brave women and men, especially the young ones, they are still taken to the street as even we speak today and yesterday. That was a nationwide demonstrations were even taking place. And another nine people were killed yesterday. And at least 16 health, like a social welfare workers were arrested, for example. But the civil servants from the CDM movement, civil disobedience movement, you know, they are getting so much pressure from the regime to return to work, and they are resisting. But some of them could not resist, because some of them are facing like at gunpoint kind of a threat. So some of them are returning to the work, where they find either they get fired, or either they get arrested, or they get a lot of like harassment. And there is a case of a doctor turned out to be dead after he returned to work. So, I mean, like my last point, because of this extreme brute force of violence, of course, people are hiding. There's civil disobedience movement, protesters, are hiding or also are fleeing to the ethnic border areas at the moment. So the humanitarian aid is so huge in the ethnic areas, because, you know, this is the area where the ethnic people have been contesting for their equality and self-determination, you know, like for a long time. And now these protesters from all parts of the country coming into their area in the more like remote areas with no humanitarian aid. So it's a huge problem that we are having. So I'll just end here just to share with you the strength and resilience is strong and firm there. The people's motto is, you will never rule us. So this is the motto, like, we will never let you rule us. But at the same time, this extreme force is day and night reality for them. So this is where the people of Myanmar situation at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daki and Ohmar. This is in so many ways a shocking account, although we hear the news and we follow developments. But the systematic violence, the brute force, is really painful to hear about. Actually, I'm going to make a correction. The questions, please use the Q&A function on Zoom for those. Thank you. And then I will turn to our next speaker, Professor Yanghee Lee. You will make your opening remarks with a focus on the international community's action and pressure. Thank you.
Hello, allow me to thank the organizers for hosting this panel and inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be on the same panel with Daki and Ohmar. As we all know, 3 months ago, Myanmar, a country that was on its way toward a democracy, was set back with the horrific coup attempted by the Tamadong. The attempted coup staged by the military on the 1st of February has not succeeded. The people of Myanmar have so far been incredibly effective in resisting the military's attempt to seize power by mobilizing massive peaceful protests, a nonviolent civil disobedient movement, and strikes by public and private sector workers. The national unity government has been set, and the 2008 constitution nulled by the CRPH. For 3 months now, this remarkable anti-coup civilian movement has demonstrated the unrelenting strength of public opposition in Myanmar to military dictatorship, and has held out against one of the most vicious and oppressive armed forces in the world. But the military generals remain determined to impose their rule and crush the opposition movement by force. In pursuit of this objective, they're using the security forces to inflict a deliberate process of killings and other forms of terror on the civilian population, the people they're supposed to protect. That is steadily escalated into great intensity. This is consistent with the strategy used repeatedly by the Tatmadaw against Myanmar's ethnic nationalities. During my term as the Special Rapporteur, I reported on countless acts of brutality committed by the security and the military against Myanmar's ethnic nationalities and religious minorities. I was the first to raise the alarm for what the military was about to do in 2017, 2 weeks before the military went all out and committed genocide against the Rohingya living in Rakhine State. Now the world is watching as this vicious cruelty is being turned against peaceful protesters on the streets of Myanmar cities, as well as in towns and villages. The military is terrorizing the peoples of Myanmar through its terrorist-like behaviors, using fighter jets, gas bombs, and snipers. I'm afraid that I may be a little bit too critical about the international community in its response to the current situation in Myanmar. Back in 2017, when the Tatmadaw was engaged in atrocities against the Rohingya, the international community was not very helpful. Well, let me put it this way. When there was a so-called prelude in 2016 against the Rohingya, and when the international community was lukewarm, the Tatmadaw went ahead with a massive offensive against the Rohingya in 2017. Still yet, the Security Council could not agree on a resolution. This, in my view, has emboldened the Tatmadaw. Although the Security Council met several times this year since the coup, it could not come up with a strong text, let alone a resolution. This brings me to strongly doubt the raison d'etre of the Council. Whatever happened to the Charter of the United Nations, especially Chapter 7? The strongest response by the Security Council came in the form of a president's statement in March 10. It strongly condemned the violence and expressed its continued support for the democratic transition in Myanmar. Furthermore, it expressed strong support for the regional organizations, in this case, ASEAN. And let me say something about the ASEAN's response. An ASEAN summit was planned, but was eventually scaled down to an ASEAN leaders meeting, which was held on 24 April. It was attended by 9 ASEAN leaders and Myanmar military commander-in-chief Min Aung Hlaing. A 5-point consensus on the situation in Myanmar was reached. The consensus includes immediate cessation of violence, constructive dialogue between all parties, the appointment of an ASEAN special envoy, provision of humanitarian assistance through the AHA Center, special envoy and delegation visit Myanmar to meet all parties concerned. A glaring omission in this consensus is the release of Aung San Suu Kyi, the president, and other government officials. Some say the ASEAN consensus was a major breakthrough. However, my SACAM colleagues, the Special Advisory Committee for Myanmar, established by myself and 2 other colleagues who were former members of the fact-finding mission, we view this as a tentative starting point, nothing more. It has opened the path for a process in response to the crisis in Myanmar. To move forward, The consensus must be followed by the concrete action from ASEAN and international engagement with the National Unity Government of Myanmar. The utmost priority is to stop the rampant violence and killings committed by the security forces. Unfortunately, on 26th April, after the ASEAN consensus, the Tamada issued a press release stating that it would give merely careful consideration to the consensus agreed with the ASEAN leaders. Meanwhile, Min Aung Hlaing's troops have continued to commit violence and murder. Again, he is trying to undermine the ASEAN consensus and trying to manipulate international efforts to engage and delay any attempt to move forward. There is a dangerous sense that the coup is becoming normalized, even accepted as the status quo. The international community must act now to prevent this from happening. The world must recognize the historic and inter-ethnic government of national unity as the only legitimate government, while pressuring the military with sanctions, an arms embargo, and a push for justice. It is now time for the international community to turn the table on the Tamada with the three cuts approach that we, SACM, proposes: a comprehensive global arms embargo, targeted sanctions against the architects of the coup, and a referral of the situation in Myanmar to the International Court of Criminal Court by the UN Security Council. Financial action could be the most effective route in the short term. The Myanmar military controls a multi-billion-dollar business empire, which allows it to operate with impunity. Cutting off these funds will be key to pressuring the Tamada to end violence and relinquish power. Other countries must follow the examples of the US and the UK, which have already imposed sanctions on the military's two largest companies, MEC and MEL. States and donors must find ways to ensure desperately needed humanitarian assistance reaches urban as well as ethnic areas where members of the democracy movement have fled from the military. Local networks in these areas already have decades of experience responding to the humanitarian crisis caused by the Tamada's brutality and should direct these efforts. The Security Council, individual states and groups of states can apply pressure to the military by supporting the three-cut strategy, cutting the weapons, cutting cash, and cutting impunity. Together with these combined efforts, the international community can support the peoples of Myanmar as they fight to free themselves from tyranny. But we must act now before it is too late. One final note: it is absolutely crucial that there is no international recognition of this military regime. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will address some of the issues, or rather ask questions to each of you on some of the issues that you raised. And I start with the ASEAN meeting and turn to you, Dr. Ohmar. So this controversial meeting on with ASEAN leaders, where Senior General Min Aung Hlaing was one of the participants. We heard you on Swedish Public Service Radio saying that the only one who benefited from that meeting was Senior General Min Aung Hlaing. Could you say something about why that is, why you make that assessment? And could you also say something about how Myanmar civil society, not least the civil disobedience movement, have reacted to the ASEAN 5-point plan, the consensus that came out of the meeting?
Thanks, Edith. So Brittis. So I said that that ASEAN meeting benefited only Min Aung Hlaing and the junta is because, as I shared earlier, the military junta, they are in the moment of really like using this brute force to take full control of the country while the people are resisting them. And attending such meeting where only the head of state supposed to be attending, to be a part of that discussion and consensus, where the whole agenda is about Burma, Myanmar. So inviting the illegal hunters, military coups leader, such as Mayor Lai, only inviting him to make us to be a part of the decision making of Myanmar's crisis is absolutely not. First of all, it is it is an insult to the people of Myanmar, who are in fact sacrificing their lives on the ground, and also it is an insult to the peoples of Myanmar, where they have given all their mandate legitimacy to the national unity government, which is a legitimate government of the country. That the NUG was actually not invited. And then like what was is like allowing Mayor Lai to be a part of the consensus decision making, which is already, it is already a telling of the ASEAN, like, you know, whether directly or not, it is what is taken as already giving the legitimacy to this regime by having him a part of the decision making, which, like Professor Yanghee said, when he returned, and then they issued the press release, the junta issued the press release that they were not even committing to those 5 points, while the ASEAN leaders, you know, like portrayed to the world as this is the victory. So I think it is so important that, you know, like ASEAN leaders really realize what they have done is rather harmful, I would say, because I mean the thing is the people of Myanmar, they need the ASEAN needs the people of Myanmar's confidence and trust for whatever the ASEAN might be doing for this country. Without the people's you know, like confidence and trust, there's no way that they will be able to do anything. So that comes to your next point. How the people of Myanmar or the civil disobedience movement reacted to the ASEAN 5 points. Well, they were totally disappointed. In fact, not even disappointed. It went beyond to be really angry. And you could have seen like the you know, like a spiral messages on the social media, how Myanmar people reject the ASEAN's approach, you know, and then also how the Myanmar people actually see the ASEAN, you know, like approaches nowhere near to the solution, you know, to the solving of the crisis, but also like, you know, like giving the legitimacy to the military junta. Many of them were even telling me like, you know, they have no expectation whatsoever from the ASEAN. So I think this is very important, because my very worry is, including the EU and like the United Nations and other countries, international governments, they probably will, you know, what our worry is that if they will put the, you know, like the ball in the court of ASEAN, as if ASEAN is the only one that, you know, like that will solve the Myanmar's crisis, which is going to be a very wrong bet if they do it. And I think like our people, our country's people cannot, they don't have a luxury of time for the international policymakers to be playing in like a policy game on at the expense of our country's people. So yeah.
Thank you. And turning back to you, Yanghee, you said that the consensus or the 5-point plan could be a tentative starting point. There was, from some quarters, initially a bit sort of hope that the pressure on the junta was in fact increasing with the ASEAN engagement. But as we hear, the violence continues. And I wonder, when you say that maybe it's a tentative starting point, how could it be built on? And also, I wonder how you see that there is a risk that ASEAN engagement, that would block pressure on the UN or say other regional groups like the EU to stand up and to increase their pressure.
When the UN or the Security Council and the international community started to say, the onus is on ASEAN. It's your region. You can engage better with Myanmar. That kind of bothered me, because I know from 2016 and 2017, or even 2015, when there was that boat crisis where the Rohingyas were fleeing from Rakhine, and many of the ASEAN countries were just sending them back. And that was termed as the boat crisis then. And then to give the responsibility to ASEAN and say, well, this is in your ballpark. Now the ASEAN has done its thing. Now it's back in the international community or the UN's ballpark. And I don't know how they're going to respond to this, but it's a starter. And I said nothing more than a starter. It's not a breakthrough. And what was missing glaringly was the release of the political prisoners, which I understand was in the text, but at the 9th hour, it was taken off. And one can only imagine how it was taken off of the draft consensus. But even the first point, immediate cessation of violence, it's a unilateral violence. It's not violence bilateral, or it's not a war zone there. It's a unilateral violence committed by the Tatmadaw against its people. The appointment of an ASEAN special envoy, well, that could be a starter, but there's already a UN special envoy. Now, who has what mandate? That is another concern for me. Provision of humanitarian assistance through the ASEAN Humanitarian Assistance Center, the AHA Center, that raised some alarm bells to me, because that was the same thing in the 2017 after the genocide of Dole Acts, and more than 1 million refugees fled to Cox's Bazar. It was the same language, provide assistance through the AHA Center. And of course, special envoy and delegation to visit Myanmar. They're saying we'll consider this, but we're not sure if we'll let you in. I think it's another delay tactic. And the ASEAN countries were into this delay tactic. And the United Nations was the facilitator of this delay tactic, I think. And I think history will tell us, and it will go down in history, how the international community failed over and over when it came to crises around the world. But when it comes to the situation in Myanmar, it failed the Rohingya people so many times. It failed the ethnic nationalities in Myanmar. For 70 years, there's been a civil war going on in the ethnic states. And now it's failing the entire people of Myanmar.
Thank you. Yeah, those are sharp words. I'll build on what you said about humanitarian needs. The needs at the moment are enormous, and we hear from civil society networks and groups that they need everything from surgery kits to funding to go underground to hospitals to protection and, as you have both been mentioning, support in terms of standing up for their fight. So Dr. Ohmar, turning to you again, in terms of supporting civil society, where you said Sweden had been at the forefront, what should Sweden do now? And what aspects should not be forgotten? I wonder if you also could say something about how Sweden, civil society in Sweden and the Swedish authorities and others, how could they how could they act to be useful allies?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I would say that the people of Sweden, if you will actually take the 3-finger salute with the people of Myanmar in their solidarity, and then spread the word around, and also particularly, really what is more important is to convince the Swedish government and the policymakers of Sweden to make the right, effective decision, and also to take the swift actions without further delay. Like I said, there is no, the Myanmar people have no luxury of time at this point. So that is for to the people of Sweden. But coming back to the government, the Swedish government, I would say that yes, of course, the humanitarian need is so is so enormous on the ground. Like starting from the for the CDM members, can you imagine that they haven't received any salary for the last 3 months? And they get all of these harassments and intimidations and threats, and unable to, many of them are already in hiding. And how about their family members who are left, the children? Many of them were kicked out of the public housing, for example. So how can we help them is something that we need the governments who have been engaging with Myanmar development plan for the last 10 years to come together to come up with the package plan to respond to this emergency need. The civil society, the offices are being raided, destroyed, computers are being taken away. Even the bank accounts that the donors have been supporting them to carry out the very good work that they've been doing to advance the human rights protection or environmental protection or labor rights or any others that you've been supporting. Now the military really is seizing all of these, money also. The bank accounts, who will show up at the bank accounts can be arrested. Like one of my friend who actually is who ran the Museum News. She was arrested, abducted by the time when she went to the bank. And so all of these civil societies, not only the civil servants and public and private sector workers are not getting the payment for their salary for the last 2-3 months, but also the civil society actors are not able to get the money out of their bank. So yes, there is a huge need of these, so how can you really help? There are many ways, of course, that people are trying to pass all of these challenges, which these are the things that we will have to have a different platform to discuss how we do all about that. But what I want to say is that there is a need of the both the humanitarian, but also people are trying to avoid the arrest. How can they avoid the arrest? For example, if they don't know where to go, if they have no place to actually stay overnight. So what would they do? They will actually flee to another town. And then, there is this the Guest Registration Act, which is absolutely crazy one from the British time. The NLD government already, already removed, repealed. But now the junta is actually using that back again. So people are scared to receive you at night, even though knowingly that you are running away from this junta's violence. So we have all of these practical, challenges on the ground. But only when we can have a separate discussion with those who will be able to support such, then we can actually find out ways to do that. But I would say that this is of course the ground reality, ground thing. But one thing that I will propose to the Swedish government is to support the cross-border humanitarian aid, because this is the only way. This is the only way. We're going back to 10, 15 years ago situation. So we have to come back to support the cross-border humanitarian aid. But in order to do that, only the financial resources not enough. We would like the Swedish government join the other like-minded governments to convince the Myanmar's neighboring countries' governments, such as Thailand or India, to be able to open their borders for a humanitarian aid corridors. We need that, yes. And then lastly is, Professor Yanghee already said, if you ask the people of Myanmar, even though if you cannot you cannot send them financial support, or even though you cannot send them practical, like a humanitarian support, you know what they would tell you is they will hold on, they will hang on to where they are right now if you will support them in their fight to topple this military regime. That's all what they want. That's all what they've been calling for. And they will carry on, they will hang on with all of the challenges and violence, but they need Swedish government and other governments to help them topple this military regime. That is the most important thing that they want. Thank you.
Thank you. In your statement, Yanghee, when you finished your mandate as special rapporteur last year, you said, I quote, "It is not too late for the country to change course and reorient itself to transform into a democracy that embraces human rights for all." That's less than a year ago you said that. And I wanted to ask if you still think that is that something you stand by? And I wonder, you keep coming back to the issue of impunity and talk about the ICC, but also other initiatives. In terms of international support, in particular now the EU and Sweden, what should they do to push for the agenda for accountability? So those two questions.
Okay, well, thank you for those questions. Yes, I stand by with what I said at the end of my mandate, and I think I also did a press media release on the last day, towards the last day of my mandate. And somehow, I was never very quite comfortable leaving the mandate. It seemed like it was going down the dark path again. Things were not progressing as we had hoped for. We should not forget that this is a grave human rights violations with enormous humanitarian implications. But it could, I'm seeing a little movement towards just viewing this situation as a humanitarian crisis, and it's easy to view it that way. Yes, it is a humanitarian crisis as a result of a major human rights violation and crisis, but we should not forget that we are now we have the backdrop, or we're not even out of the COVID-19 pandemic yet, and with the medical facilities not functioning, one worries what the people in Myanmar will have to live with after all of this violence subsides one of these days. Now, how to, for impunity, during my mandate, I called for 4 things. One was to refer to the ICC. 2, refer to ICJ. Those 2 are pretty much happening now. 3, apply a universal jurisdiction. That's happening too in Argentina. Argentina has decided to apply a universal jurisdiction. And the 4th one is to establish a tribunal, an ad hoc tribunal. Now, I would strongly suggest that Sweden joins in with Canada and the Gambia and the Netherlands and Maldives with the ICJ in pushing for accountability for the genocidal crimes committed by Temada against the Rohingya. Now, in terms of sanctions, the EU is starting to have to put more sanctions, and countries, individual member states of the EU can also do this bilaterally. Weapons and also sanctions against the military entities and their families, associates and cronies and their families, and trying to locate the financial stream that benefits from your multinational corporations or your investments. Another thing I'd like to suggest is when when we talk about arms embargo or sanctions against arms sale, let's not forget the dual purpose objects or materials. I forget what the appropriate language would be. And these would include vehicles, drones, surveillance materials used for the protection of the people. And now they're being turned around, used against the people itself that they're supposed to protect. So there's a lot of things that member states can do bilaterally and really pursue this bilaterally. But above all, I think to join hands at the ICJ and push for ICC, but of course this will have to come through the Security Council, but you can join hands trying to leverage the neighboring countries of Myanmar to open up for humanitarian corridor, as Dr. Ohmar said. And we do need to find ways where the young generation and the human rights activists can find safe haven.
Excellent. Those were very clear recommendations. I want to look at the questions we're receiving from the audience. We have received one from Member of Parliament Thomas Hammarberg. He's asking what steps by the Swedish government and the EU would be effective against the military repression. And I turn that question to you, Dr. Ohmar, since Yanghee Lee just gave us a catalogue of a wish list.
So I think for the Swedish government in the past, Swedish government had done some great work in terms of policy making at the UN on the UN stage, like at the Security Council. Of course, when Sweden was Security Council member, but then being there, also being a part of the General Assembly, the Sweden has a voice. Sweden also has a say over a lot of different international policy making at the moment. What we have been pushing for is, first and foremost, we need the violence to stop and prevent further atrocities. So how do we do that? We know that like Professor Yanghee Lee already explained, the ASEAN Special Envoy alone will not be able to do this either. Whereas right now the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy, who've been trying to get into the country. Also, the reality is, even if the Special Envoy is able to have access to the country, she alone will not be able to stop the violence anyway. So what we really need is the Security Council to act. But then what is so disappointing is that, that the ball is being kind of thrown back and forth. So people are the different member states are saying well, it's because of China, it's because of Russia that we won't be able to take any, make any move. I think for us, that excuse is not enough. Because what we want to see is even the Security Council, come to the point of unable to adopt a resolution. We want to see the resolution. We want to see the member states of the Security Council take the step up and make the point of discussing about the resolution, for example. And Sweden, even though not a member of the Security Council, can still actually play within the diplomatic, channel, through the diplomatic channels, and also within the current right now there is this General Assembly resolution being deliberated. We would like the Sweden to actually, take more steps immediately in New York and talk to the others. What we want is to ensure that, people's elected representatives, such as the National Unity Government and also the Parliament. There's a committee representing Pidangsu or the Union Parliament. They need to be recognized by the General Assembly resolution. So I think these are the immediate steps that the Sweden can take, of course, but at the national level. This is something I have to tell you though, even before the coup, in my advocacy to the Swedish government in the past few years, especially since the genocide against the Rohingya in 2017, my call to the Swedish government is to take the unilateral measures as much as they can. I'm like, yes, of course, we want to see the collective actions from the international community, through the United Nations. But if it doesn't work, if it is not possible yet, we want also the champions of the democracy and human rights to take the step up and take the unilateral action, such as like the Sweden government can actually take the impose the targeted sanctions against certain the military businesses, but also there are certain businesses within Sweden, all the companies who domicile in Sweden, they have an obligation to comply with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. But also the Swedish government also can be taking the very important role, leading role, to make sure that they do. So I think there are many things that the Sweden can do. But lastly, that I would say another immediate actions is the humanitarian aid and support to the civil society and the media who have lost the space in the country. They need the urgent support. So there are many of these different, different actions, immediate and urgent, and also intermediate and long term. But I think I would just end here because I don't want to be like British say that there will be a wishful a wish list. I think the wish list can become a real if those who have the who are in the position to make the decisions will make the decision. So I hope that Sweden will make the decision. Thank you.
I think it's super useful with a concrete wish list. I think that's really what's needed at the moment. I'll go to some of the questions that we are receiving. And there are a couple of them to you, Yanghee, relating to the UN. One is how to get China on board with your 3-cut strategy. The other one that I link to it is Sweden is a large contributor to the UN system. What is your advice for Swedish MPs considering the failure in actions on the situation of Myanmar?
Oh, thank you for those questions. And I must note an old friend, Thomas Hommerberg's question. It was so good to hear the name again. His work with children's rights was just groundbreaking too. The Swedish government, I think, is in a good position to leverage the other UN member states for accountability. It's always been troubling when in the UN system, when we are reviewing countries depending on how they have ratified the different human rights instruments, we call for accountability. But no one ever calls for accountability of the UN and its member states. And perhaps it's time. And I think maybe Sweden can be a champion in trying to call for, let's measure our work. Let's hold ourselves accountable for what we do or what we don't do. So I think this is a time where Sweden can talk to other members or even the United Nations Secretary General. Speaking from my own personal capacity, I'm saying that why isn't the Secretary General going to Myanmar himself? Because when he requests them, when he tells them, I'm coming to Myanmar, it would be very difficult for the Tatmadaw to say, no, you're not coming. After all, he's the Secretary General. And by his presence, that will de-escalate the violence, at least give some breather for the people, the unarmed civilians, the innocent people and children. And I think he needs to go in and start to engage with all the parties, all the actors, Okay? People have worried that this might legitimize the junta, but no, I think it's gone past that time. He needs to go there himself. I'm told that the third Secretary General, ironically, Burmese or Myanmarian, U Thant, went to Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Why not the Secretary General? And perhaps the Swedish Parliament can convince him.
Thank you. I'll return to civil society and for you, Khin Ohmar, with questions that sort of link together. One is, how does the resistance movement organize and mobilize? Another one is relating to financial support to human rights groups in the country. What can be done about it? A third one relates to the bank system controlled by the Tatmadaw, making it a huge challenge to actually transfer financial support to civil society groups. What's your best advice on those issues? Could you give a 2-minute response to that, because we're approaching the end of our hour?
Sure. Sorry, can I get the first point, Brittis? Sorry about that.
The last one was the bank.
First point. Sorry, first point.
The first one, the resistance, how it's organized.
So, well, resistance is still like first is they really rely on the social media a lot, like online communications a lot, but also because of the violence now, like a lot of localized communications or different secure communications being developed also from the IT, from the IT experts. So they are trying to use those applications a lot to also communicate among themselves. And I would say that in spite of the internet shutdown, it is still people are still able to communicate to each other and still organizing each other. But then you can see that compared to the beginning time of the movement, now it is a lot more a localized, but it's really interesting. Like yesterday, it was a nationwide. But not only nationwide, it's actually coordinated to the international movement as well. So people are still trying to mobilize among themselves very well, I would say. But then coming to the financial and the bank system. See, these are the things it's really beyond the control of the general public, which of course includes the activists and civil servants and all of them. So I think this is a part of the bigger policy level that we need the international community support to deal with, because unless including the Swedish government to really address such policy level issues to bring down this military regime, the people will not have a chance. Doesn't matter how much of the millions of dollars or Swedish krona that you want to send in. There's no way that they will be able to get it. So I think that first and foremost is to, like I said, is to really get rid of this military from the country's politics. Yeah.
Thank you. And with that, the last words from me. Thank you both very much. And I'm handing over back to Olle for the departure. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittis. And I just want to conclude by thanking Yanghee and Khin Ohmar for sharing your vast knowledge and expertise, and also thank you for the work that you do for the people of Myanmar, and want to express the solidarity that we share with the people of Myanmar, people that has been tormented for decades by oppression and dictatorship and military rule, and but now have tasted freedom and will not back down. And it's our obligation, I think, as members of the international community, not just to make sort of a wish list, but it's not a wish list. It's a list of necessary actions that we have an obligation to act on in our different roles as parliamentarians, or as working for the Swedish government and authorities, or as part of civil society, or as just fellow human beings in this world who cannot stand seeing people suffer in the way they do in Myanmar. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone, and Brittis, of course, as well, and the Swedish Burma Committee and Amnesty International for hosting this seminar together. So thank you so much, and take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.